Welcome to our HistoReddit Prorevenge channel, where justice is sweet and brutal. This story is very well known in my family and is always remembered and told as a joke among my friends, even after years. A friend of mine told me this is the perfect place to share it, so here we go. I was a senior in high school at the time, and I was never a very good student. I got average grades and never got a warning or got into any trouble at school. This is important because to this day I don't know why the teacher treated me that way. The teacher, who we'll call Miss Frank, taught algebra, which is my toughest subject. So naturally, I struggled to understand the lessons and asked questions frequently. For me, some of these questions were complicated, but for her, they were simple. Generally, when someone asks a simple question, no one should be bothered. But in Miss Frank's case, she would humiliate me in front of everyone, saying things like, "And there comes the slow boy again, wow, surprise surprise, you don't get it again, we really have to go further, slow for you today, isn't it," etc. I tried talking to the principal about this before, but she was seen as the darling of the school. They would send someone to watch her during class. She would be good one day and go back to being a bad person the next. This went on for about half the year, until I couldn't take it anymore. I went to an electronics store, bought a tape recorder, and secretly recorded every insult she gave me. Sometimes I would tease her to have more material. I got to the end of the year and I was in Miss Frank's class when I asked her a question. Her response, which I'll never forget because it's burned into my mind, was, "I've been teaching here for over 10 years and that was the dumbest question I've ever heard come out of anyone's mouth." She continued the class without answering me. I quietly got up, packed my things and went to the nurse's office to get released from school. We could do this if we were 18. I went home, assembled all the cruel recordings into a glorious masterpiece, and came back the next day to show the directors. I sat down with the director and we listened to some of the abuse before he cut me off. He wanted more witnesses present, as well as Miss Frank. He told me that we would meet the next day to show him and the rest of the directors the completed tape. I arrived at school the next morning, very nervous about everything. I was called into the office where I found some board directors, the local school constable, the principal, vice principal, and Miss Frank. What happened next was some of the best minutes of my life. I watched as the directors went from bored being in another pointless meeting to furious and speechless, with some of them gaping during the tape. Miss Frank was publicly burning herself in front of the most important people in the district. The tape ended and without hesitation the directors looked around in amazement and the director turned to me and said, "I think we've heard all we need to. Thanks." And I was quietly dismissed from the room. The last time I saw Miss Frank was when she was leaving the room. I looked at her and saw her eyes filled with tears. I felt a mixture of relief and compassion. The following week I went back to class and found that Miss Frank was gone. She had been fired because of what I did. I recorded the tapes that proved that she was an abusive and unfair teacher and handed them over to the school board. I didn't want to ruin her life, but I couldn't let her continue to mistreat the students. I hope she learned her lesson and that she can recover from this situation. If you're reading this, Miss Frank, I want you to know that I don't hold a grudge against you. I just wanted a better learning environment for myself and my peers. This story was posted by Johnny Provolone, and I'm talking to you, Johnny Provolone. If you still have these tapes, please contact me. I would love to hear them and share them in a video. And for everyone else, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because if Johnny gives me permission to use the tapes, you'll want to be here to hear them. A few months ago, as you all remember, Florida was hit by some devastating hurricanes. My parents live there, and although there was no serious damage, our house needed some repairs. The insurance covered the cost of the water that got in through the roof, but they also needed a new roof because of the shingles that were torn off and the objects that had punctured it. My parents researched roofing options and decided that a metal roof would be a great choice for reducing damage and house maintenance, as well as being a more energy-efficient option with passive solar collection and less heat loss in the summer. And in winter. It was more expensive, but my father has always been very careful with his personal finances, and he has enough money to invest in the house. It seemed like a great idea to put up that roof. They did not check the condominium regulations and discovered that since 1989 metal roofs have been prohibited in the neighborhood, subject to fines and mandatory removal. Looking at the original document, they saw that it was referring to the old, ugly metal roofs, not the modern, beautiful ones they wanted to put up. They decided to follow the rules and called the condominium to explain the situation. The condo was sympathetic and said they would review this policy, as my parents weren't the only ones who asked permission to have a metal roof. My parents weren't able to hire a contractor for a few months anyway, as there was so much demand after the hurricanes, so they waited a few weeks and got no response from the condo. They tried again a few weeks later, but nothing. After 2 months of this, they gave up waiting and started building the metal roof. Most of the neighbors supported their decision, and the roof was covered with a tarp that would not last forever. The new roof was installed in just a few days. And so we know the HOAs. The neighborhood has a beautiful brick sign at the entrance that says "Welcome" to the name of the neighborhood. It is very elegant and beautiful, but it was badly affected by the hurricane. The HOA was strapped for cash because of other repairs and debt, and someone had the unfortunate idea of slapping as many fines as they could on the residents to pay for those repairs. Starting with my parents, who they notified with a letter claiming they violated the HOA and demanded a fine of 25,000 reais and that they remove the metal roof, which is clearly absurd. My dear mother is a person who follows the rules, and she was worried. My father, who was an ex-Navy and a contract negotiator, he basically laughed and said, "Oh, you fools, wanna play? You'll see." He got through it, but they got a surprise a few weeks after being notified. I don't really know the date, since I don't live in Florida. It could have been less. There was a meeting at the HOA where my parents could defend themselves for a ridiculously short amount of time, and the HOA could reject them for daring to challenge their authority. So my mother, because she is more sociable and has a better temper than her father, went to speak and let the HOA know that they couldn't do that. The HOA smiled and said sure they could, as they had a 40-year statute saying they could. Mom said yes, but I have a state law on my side that overrides your statute. After all, there is a law in Florida stating that an HOA or any regulation cannot be used to prevent an ecological improvement from taking place on someone's private property. And did you know that passive solar energy from metal roofs counts as an ecological improvement? The HOA was speechless. The hiring officer showed some accreditation letters and some past cases where the court determined your product was eco-friendly and forced the HOA to pay all legal fees. My mother showed all of this to neighbors outraged by the lousy HOA, who had to admit this was a desperate attempt to get money as they couldn't afford a lawyer. My mother proposed to impeach board members at any HOA meeting and to elect their replacements. She said, "I propose impeachment of all of you. I nominate my husband," and she recited a list of names. The HOA was surprised. Well, the father had studied the law, the mother had studied the new neighborhood. Popular opinion was on their side, and the meeting was public to the neighbors. The mother convinced most of the owners to come and remove the board because of her bad management. With that, my parents are now on the new council. My father is using his contract negotiation skills and his own crafting skills to repair the front entrance. And metal roofs are now allowed under the new HOA. This couple is amazing. It's a double win. The husband solves the problem and the wife recruits a team. I love this couple. I work as a machinist. I run smaller trains mostly in the countryside, and people are generally nice and well-mannered. But of course there are also alcoholics, drug addicts, and general freaks who use public transport. And some people who live to be a nuisance. That was a few years ago. We were traveling in the late afternoon and my driver was very irritated and upset. He told me that there were 2 rude and dishonest passengers on board who had no tickets and refused to pay. They even mocked him and asked what he was going to do about it. He asked me to help him kick them out at the next stop as they were only going to travel 1 station. I agreed with him and let him vent. The next stop arrived and the passengers got off. The driver waved them off and we continued on our way. A few hours later the train returned as it was the last one for the day and almost empty. The conductor knew where each passenger was going to get off, and he talked to me up front. Everything was fine until we approached the station where we dropped off those passengers. We saw 2 people waiting there. It was them. The conductor smiled from ear to ear and told me not to stop the train. I thought it was funny and slowed down the train without stopping. As we passed them, the driver rolled down his window, waved, and said loudly and happily, "This is how I handle things." Passengers gaped as we passed them. We laughed a lot until we reached our final destination. This story would be interesting in itself, but there is more. A few weeks later, we meet these passengers again. They boarded at the same station as the last time, but we didn't notice. They wanted to travel further this time, but when the conductor went to check their tickets, he recognized them and confronted them in front of the other travelers. He asked if they had money to pay for the tickets this time. They said no and asked him to be nice and let them travel. He said he didn't care about them and that they would have to get off at the next stop. They complained that that station was too far from their destination, but he didn't care. He said he was going to warn the train behind not to catch them either. They got off the train and we continued our journey. Later, we learned that they were seen walking along a forest path beside the railway line. We never saw those passengers again. This is a comment from another thread about a job where I and 200 colleagues were promised and received bonuses. The company was a financial service famous for paying well, but one year they decided they would keep the bonuses for themselves. This is how I handled it. I went through something similar in 2000. I worked for a finance company with 1,800 employees, with a sales force of 200. I was one of the sellers. We had our annual meeting in April. It was a large event, attended by most of the employees. The CEO gave a speech praising the previous year as the best in the company's history, blah blah blah. The following month, we all submitted reports explaining why we deserved or should receive a bonus at the end of June. In my report, I've shown the increase in sales in my territory over the past 12 months and my share of total sales for the past year. After the company's best year, I thought it would be easy to get the bonus. We were all excited about what was to come in June. June came and my bonus was zero. But I wasn't the only one. Almost the entire sales area was left without bonuses. Only 20% of the sales force received anything. It was chaos. Everyone was revolted. Supervisors had to deal with angry employees. The sales manager too. And the vice president and director above him. All were indignant and dissatisfied. Angry and accusatory emails circulated around the company. It looked like there was going to be a riot. The situation got worse when we discovered that supervisors were given bonuses that they could decide for themselves. Most of them took the money, but some, knowing their employees would get nothing, refused. My supervisor took his. When he told his sales team, he tried to justify himself and say how hard he worked. He only managed to make people yell at him, saying that they too worked hard but got nothing. For a week or so, things stalled on the shop floor. Many people simply did not go to work. Those who went got angry. I was one of them. I logged in and started reading Monster.com at my desk. I also stopped selling anything or answering my phone. When my boss confronted me, I told him I wouldn't go back to work until I got the bonus my sales warranted. Until then, I would be late, read and respond to ads, and leave early. He said he expected me to keep it up until I found another job or got fired the next day. I did it myself. I told the national sales director that if she had already heard about my supervisor, she already knew why I wasn't working and I didn't need to repeat myself. She tried to make conversation with me, being friendly, then stern, then angry. She said the longer I went without selling, the more sales my territory would lose. I think I gave her my average daily sales from the previous year and calculated what the total loss would be for a week of no sales. I told her it would be cheaper for them to pay me back what they owed me and get me back to selling. Afterwards, I thanked her for her time and said I would leave work as soon as I left her office. And that's what I did. The next day I arrived, checked my emails, some of which were from coworkers who had resigned over stolen bonuses, and sat at Monster.com until they called me to the national sales manager's office. He is the boss of all 200 of us. He told me that he understood that I was upset and could see why. I asked him if it was his or someone else's idea to withhold the 80% sales force bonuses. He did not answer. He told me I would get a check on Monday and if I could please get back to work now. I told him I would go back to my desk, but I wouldn't start working until the check was in my hand. When I returned and checked my emails, I saw that more colleagues had left the next day. An email went out to all of Salesforce's management that the numbers were good, finances were in order, and the June bonuses would be paid out soon. The email also apologized for the delay and thanked us for our hard work as salespeople, saying that we were the heart of the company and that our dedication was valued. I also received another email, this time from the national sales manager, who told me that even though the bonuses were scheduled for Monday, he would bring my check to my desk the next day. The next day I arrived, sat down, and shortly thereafter the national sales manager came over and handed me my bonus check. I thanked him and handed him my letter of resignation, effective immediately. In my resignation letter, I requested that the check for my unused vacation time be issued and given to me before I left the building. When he finished reading it, I told him that I had already cleaned my desk while waiting for the vacation check. While I was doing this, one of my coworkers also resigned, effective immediately. We went out together and ended up celebrating at the bar across the street. I later learned from coworkers who stated that although the company paid the bonuses, they lost about 20% of their sales force in the next 2 months. I am sad for the situation of the company, but happy for my decision. Companies like this don't make sense to me. They cut bonuses because they wanted to save money and increase profits, but the amount of money they lost from demotivating their employees is far greater than the amount they saved. So why do this in the first place? I think they simply expect people to be loyal to the company without getting anything in return. This is neither fair nor sustainable. I deserve a better, more rewarding job. That was my choice and I don't regret it. I'll make an effort to see if I can find those professor tapes. I don't know if it will work, but if it does, I will definitely share it with you. It seems that these tapes are very interesting. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you liked it, please subscribe to the channel, leave your like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. I thank you for your attention and until next time. Goodbye.